So what Bill has done is gone through this thing from the point of view of a hydraulics unit employee. And now I'm going to go through it from the point of view of you're the Roadway employee and you've actually got to manipulate the spreadsheet to get a final paper product or a PDF file at the very end. You've got a bunch of handouts in front of you. The one that has the nice, pretty cover for it is the one that's related to what Bill talked about. All the remaining ones are things that are related to what I'm going to talk about. So this is a technical demonstration. What you have in front of you, you have a bunch of handouts there. One of them is an example printout, 11 by 17 sheet of paper of a single drainage summary sheet. I'm not actually going to talk about that handout. That was just to give you an example of a final product. You have a printer's sheet. We'll talk some about that in the next hour. And then you have a printout of, in the drainage summary sheet Excel file, there are multiple worksheets. One of those worksheets is labeled Help, and this is a printout of the Help worksheet. For support purposes, I think Bill's already mentioned it, that if you need support, Bill and I are the people to come to at DOT. One of our very first questions is going to be, did you read the Help file? Did you follow the instructions? And so I encourage you, please do that first before you actually start trying to manipulate the Excel file. In this presentation, we're going to talk about the hydro workflow very, very briefly. That's because Bill's already talked about it in some detail. We're going to talk about the roadway workflow. That too will be somewhat of a summary. I'm not going to go into a great depth of that. Instead, I'm going to spend my time mostly talking about manipulation of the Excel file. We're going to explore in that file most of the worksheets that you see. There are a ton of worksheets that are hidden. We may unhide a few of those if we have enough time and take a look at some of the hidden ones. But there are about half a dozen that are visible to you, and we'll work our way through most of those. The Excel file has a bunch of Bill Gates tools disabled. An example would be the print tools. They are intentionally disabled. Copy-paste is intentionally disabled. And then things like insert row, delete row, I think I've disabled those types of commands as well. And instead I've given you a whole bunch of custom tools that accomplish these same types of things. And this is an effort to try and protect the file from damage and protect it from people who don't know what's going on in an Excel file. In fact, if you're already a bit of an Excel whiz now, you're probably going to have a bit of a problem with this. It's going to be the novice Excel user that probably is going to have fewer problems with this because they've never been using the built-in Excel tools that you experienced users are familiar with. RipRap, we do pick up some RipRap information. I'll show you a worksheet related to that, but that is a side topic. The help file has 2 pages of disclaimers and cautionary notes. We're not going to talk about, I think there are 28 of them and there probably should be more. We're not going to talk about all 28 disclaimers and cautionary notes, but I think about 10 or 12 of them we're going to explore. And then if there is enough time, like I said, we will look at some of the hidden spreadsheets, as well as we might just take a glance at some of the macro code that's driving the Excel spreadsheet from behind. This is a work in progress. We gladly accept input. In particular, if you see things that are not being picked up for the drainage summary sheet that should be, please let us know, and we will try and make an attempt that the next version of the program picks those items up if it's possible to do that. All right. So that's a summary of what we're going to talk about. I have briefly touched on your handouts. Let's actually launch a drainage summary sheet. Bill made the comment, because I requested him to do that, that on the second page, or the actual first page of this beast, his handout, the very first section there lists the names of the programs as you see them as a user. When you do the drop down from the hydro menu bar, those are the names that you see first. But then in parentheses to the right of those names, those are the actual program names that are used in the background. So what do you see for the drainage summary sheet? It is a program called Drainage Summary Sheet. It's down near the bottom there. But we as programmers, what do we refer to the thing? We refer to it as pads. And so please forgive me, I probably will be referring to this guy, the program that generates the drainage summary sheet. I'll be referring to it as pads. And indeed, in your help file that's printed out, this stuff right here, it is referred to as pads rather than the drainage summary sheet program. It gets a bit wordy to talk about the drainage summary sheet, the final product, versus the drainage summary sheet program. So I'll make the distinction, pads is the program, drainage summary sheet is the final product. Well, in terms of a roadway workflow, you take a look at your handout that is the help file, and at the top there's a one-paragraph deal on the hydro workflow. That's because this document is more related to in-house our roadway people. So the roadway workflow takes up 3 or 4 paragraphs there. I'm not going to go into detail about that. The bottom half of that first page, Abby Voigt was mentioned early on as a person in Roadway who took this thing and actually worked through it as a user and came up with a lot of helpful suggestions for her co-workers. And I thought those suggestions were so helpful that I incorporated her suggestions at the bottom half of that page. So before you tackle manipulating the Excel file, it would be wise to read the bottom half of that, plus then the disclaimers that follow. All right, first step I would do as a roadway user, I would make a backup copy of this thing, because as soon as you start manipulating it, if you damage it, you're toast. So first thing would be a backup copy. There are certain milestones that you also reach. At each milestone, I think I would make a backup copy. And then there's one other time I would make a backup copy. I have built in the capability to do some sorting. If you're going to do a sort, before you do that sort, make a backup copy. Second step is to come to the home page. You'll see the names of the worksheets here at the bottom. It will always open up to the home worksheet. We have 2 other worksheets here, the 48 or less and 54 or more. Forevermore, I'm going to simply refer to these as the 48 and the 54. They are interface worksheets. They are not the worksheets that actually print. The worksheet that actually prints is hidden from you. Then we have a worksheet dedicated to riprap. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. The printer's worksheet, you have a printout of that as one of your handouts. And then the help worksheet, you have a printout of that as well. So let's start with the home worksheet. The hydro user, when he turns this thing over to our roadway user in-house, the only thing that the hydro user is specified this drop down here for CS versus CAA pipe. That's the only thing he's done. He hasn't filled in any of this other stuff. So the roadway user comes in, he puts the project number in, he puts the sheet number for the first 48 sheet in, and once he puts that sheet number in, the Excel file already knows how much data is present, so it knows what the first 54 sheet should be numbered, and it numbers it accordingly. You can override that by manipulating the checkbox here, and you can enter in any sheet number you want for the first 54. Now, when the VBAs run that you're running as a hydro user within MicroStation, when they run and dump data into this thing, all of the data is dumped on the 48 sheet, regardless of whether it is ultimately supposed to go on the 54 or not. Everything's dumped on the 48. So this program is looking at how many rows of data are currently on the 48 interface sheet, and it then is numbering the pages accordingly. Well, as part of the manipulation, you're going to start moving stuff from the 48 sheet over to the 54. The program will keep track of that, and it will adjust the page numbers accordingly. And that's what you're going to do, is after you fill this stuff in, and I'm not going to fill in the remaining stuff here, computed by date, checked by date. This just fits a standard NCDOT header. This stuff is captured and carried over to the header. You'll notice that a computer name is put in here. This, you don't have access to that cell. Whatever computer opens up this file, the Excel file goes and looks at the computer name and it puts it in that cell. So if I open this up on a different desktop, whatever that desktop computer name is, if it's PC1, if that's its name, it's going to put that name there. And the reason that is like that is that the Roadway design unit wanted the printer name, the computer name that submitted the print to show up on the final product. So whatever computer name shows there is going to show up on the final product, the print, the paper print, or the PDF file. And then the bottom two cells have to do with adjusting zoom in and zoom out settings for final products. I would recommend that you leave those set where they are right now, but if you made a paper print to 11 by 17 and it was too small or too big, you could come back to this location and adjust that zoom setting. Keep in mind that I have killed all the standard built-in print tools related to Excel, so you won't be able to go in and change margins and things like that. This is where you would control the size of the final product. So before I leave this page, any questions? All right, then the next step for a Roadway user would be to go to the 48 or less interface worksheet. And the Hydro user has supposedly already opened up this 48 sheet and scanned it for problems. If he doesn't see any problems, he doesn't do anything to it in-house for us. And he just turns it over to the Roadway user to actually start doing the manipulation. And the Roadway user is advised to start with row 1 and look at each one of these individual rows to make sure that the data is correct. I know that's tedious, but that's sure a whole lot less tedious than if you had to manually enter it yourself. But a word to the wise would be to confirm that the information is correct. He also has to, as he goes through each row, decide which rows need to go over to the 54 or more sheet, and there's a way to do that, and I'll demonstrate that in a few minutes. So that's a decision he makes. He also must address every row that has a red square here, because that means there's something out here in the dump column on the very far right, as you can see right there. And you can look up here in the formula bar to see information that is in the dump column there. So it's not the Hydro user's responsibility in-house for us that addresses this. It's the Roadway user that addresses it. And he's going to manually enter whatever information he can glean from here back into the proper columns. Once he has addressed it, he's then going to delete what's in the dump column, and that will clear the red square. After addressing everything in the dump column, entering in information that wasn't picked up by the process, hand entering that information in, then he's going to be faced with generating his final product. That's going to be a paper print, 11 by 17, 22 by 34, or generating PDF, a PDF product. In order to do that, you have to get the columns within print range. When I was first given, I'm not a Roadway person, I'm not a Hydro person. I was brought in because I had some rudimentary Excel skills, and I started asking questions. Well, how many columns do I need to be able to accommodate in the worksheet? And they showed me a typical paper product, and when we counted up the rows, we ended up, the columns, it was not only how many rows I needed, but how many columns do I need to be able to accommodate. I counted up the rows and came up with about 100. And that's what they currently were using, about 100 columns, and that all fit on an 11 by 17 piece of paper. You needed a microscope to read the numbers, but at least it did fit, right? I said, okay, we can do that. I can mimic what you've done here in paper, and I can get that into an Excel spreadsheet. And they said, but wait a second. We don't use the same columns on every project. And so how many columns potentially, other columns, could you have? And that's when we started looking at them, and this is where Jason Talley, who's in the audience today, and he's now out there in your world, but when he was working for DOT, he was indispensable for this. We got together and figured out how many possible columns could there be, knowing that there were only 100 you could display, but how many possible columns could you have? Ended up with around 200 plus. Well, there's no way, obviously, you can get 200 columns to fit onto an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. So we had to give the user the ability to hide those columns that aren't being used for a specific project. So all 200 of those columns are present here on the 48 sheet, but after you've entered your data, then you're going to have to select which columns to hide, and I give you a special tool to do that, which columns to hide to bring it within the print range. And this yellow bar shows the print range. And there's the right-hand edge of the paper right there. So you're going to have to hide, and that's what, column 101? And we go all the way out here to column 205. You're going to have to hide over 100 columns to get that thing within print range. You'll also notice that we're on the 48 interface sheet, but on that interface sheet are columns for 54, 60, 66, so on and so on. That's because all the data initially gets dumped here. You then are going to have to move stuff over to the 54 sheet, and you'll end up hiding the columns here related to that. On the 54 sheet, all of those same columns are repeated. Notice there's 12, 15, so on and so on. They don't belong here on the 54. But what if you inadvertently, accidentally moved some of a 15-inch pipe data over to the 54 interface sheet? I needed to have a place for it to go. I didn't want to get lost in space. And then you would have the ability to move it back again. So both interface sheets have all columns related to both sheets. And the same concept is applicable here in terms of print width. You're going to have to hide columns to bring it within print range. So that would be the last step that the Roadway user would do, would be to hide the columns. Well, not truly the last step, because the last step is to generate the final product, a paper print or a PDF file. So that's an overview of the Roadway workflow. Let's take a look at some, but not all, of the disclaimers. That's the second page of your help handout. Number one, when you're in MicroStation and you run the program called Drainage Summary Sheet, which in the background is referred to as the program pads, when you run pads, it generates an Excel file. 3 days later, you decide to run that program again. It's not going to dynamically append your earlier file. It's going to generate a brand new spreadsheet and put the date on there. So this, in our in-house for us, this has an impact with the following scenario. Hydro generates a drainage summary sheet. They eventually turn it over to Roadway. The Roadway engineer invests 2 days manipulating that spreadsheet that he got from Hydro. Then something changes on the project and Hydro has to run the drainage summary sheet again. It's a brand new file. The Roadway user, he has 2 days invested in the original one. He's got a decision to make. Does he then want to take the new Excel file and redo all of that work again? Or whatever changes occurred in the new file, does he want to manually incorporate those in the one that he has all that effort involved in? I don't have an answer for that question, but you're going to have to do one or the other. It's going to be a cost-benefit analysis. Which one do I want to deal with? Does that make sense? Yeah. Bullet number 4. The user edits and adds data on the 2 interface worksheets, one for 48 data and one for 54. I've already mentioned that pads initially places all of the stuff on the 48 sheet, and the user subsequently is going to have to move stuff back and forth between the 2 sheets, and I provide you with custom tools to do that with, which we'll look at in a minute. I've already mentioned bullet number 5. Both the 48 and the 54 sheets, the interface sheets, have all possible columns for any project. That's not true, because there are some blank columns in case you have some drainage element for which we've not provided a column. There will be some blank columns that you manually can use for those elements. But the 2 interface sheets are duplicates of each other in terms of which columns they display. Bullet number 15, there's a nice big jump. The 48 sheet accommodates 2,000 rows of data. I've given you the ability to insert additional rows. So if you inserted an additional 40 rows, you would have 2,040 rows. But only the first 2,000 are going to print. So if you have data below the 2,000th row, that data will never show up in the final products. Also, the spreadsheet is set up print-wise to print 50 data rows per sheet. You can't alter that. So when you do the math, 2,000 rows at 50 rows per sheet, that comes out to 40 sheets. Yes, so you could potentially print 40 sheets for the 48 or less data. The capacity for 54 and greater is much less. We provided, I think, 100 rows of data, 100 data rows for the 54 and greater. And at 50 rows a sheet, that is 2 sheets. So for 48 and less, you get 40 sheets. For 54 and higher, you get 2 sheets. And that was a discussion of bullet number 16, the capacity of the 54 sheet. Print routines are set up. The custom print tools that I'm providing you, they identify the last row that you have data on. So if you print the entire file, it's not going to print out 40 sheets of paper. If your last data row is on the third sheet, it's only going to print out 3 sheets of paper. Bullet number 18, the printouts are set at 50 data rows per sheet. Oh, already mentioned that. There is a way to control the page breaks to some extent. You'll always end up with 50 rows on a sheet. But let's say that in row 48 on the third sheet, you have a drainage element that you actually would like to cascade and start on the fourth sheet. You can use a workaround on that by inserting, using the tool that I allow you to insert rows with. You can insert 2 blank rows. That would push it down to the next sheet. That basically is the only control you have over where page breaks are going to occur. Bullet number 21. The standard Excel print tools and commands have been disabled. The file has a variety of custom print tools. We'll look at each one of those for not only generating final paper products, but it has custom print tools that if you want to print the help file out or you want to print out the list of printers, you can't use the Bill Gates print tools. You've got to use mine. With respect to final products, I've given you the ability to print a single 11x17 sheet of page 3, the third page if you want to, or I've given you the ability to print out the whole thing. Same thing with respect to 22x34 plots. You can print out the third sheet only if you want to, or you can print out the whole thing. PDFs. This only works with desk PDF. If you happen to have desk PDF, then you can generate PDF files of the products. And the macros that run in the background in the Excel spreadsheet, they will let you generate a PDF of a single sheet if you want to, or the entire project. If you elect to do the entire project, you also have the option of creating 1 PDF per sheet or a single PDF that has all of the sheets in it. So that flexibility is provided.
We picked the desk PDF because that was what was on our machines. It's also, we looked just recently, it's only $35 a copy is what it looks like, $35 to $40 a copy. So it doesn't break your bank if that's how y'all want to do it, to have to purchase 1 copy of it, I guess. And he looked and he tried, actually, Steve looked and tried to do some with Adobe, and the source code, he had a hard time figuring out how to do it for Adobe. And then there were a couple other options. So, you know, where do you stop on which PDF writer do you use? So he picked the one that was good.
It's desk PDF, that's it. The last sentence there with bullet number 21, the 48 and 54 interface worksheets that the user sees are not the ones that actually print. I will drill this in several times. You never see the sheet that prints. The sheets that you do see do not print. There is absolutely no reason to try and change any of the formatting on those sheets, because if you do change the formatting on it, in an attempt to change what the final product looks like, there's no reason to do any formatting changes on the interface sheets, because those format changes do not cascade over to the hidden sheet that actually prints. And that there was a question early on about how many decimal places. That, yes, on the interface sheet you could change the number of decimal places that display, but that's not going to cascade over to the sheet that's hidden that actually prints. So there'd be no reason to do that. Bullet number 22. The user is only allowed to print cues listed on the printer's worksheet. We'll talk some about that in a few more moments. But just keep in mind there is a worksheet called printers in this file, and if you have mapped to a particular printer that your company uses, you then need to list that printer on the printer's worksheet. Bullet number 26, all visible worksheets are protected without passwords. So if I go to the 48 or less worksheet, that worksheet is protected to try and protect against damage, but it's not protected with a password. If you want to unprotect it and start trying to play around with it, I'm letting you do that. But there's a downside to that. If you unprotect any worksheet in this file, support ends at that point. the warranty is voided. That's it. But you could unprotect them if you wanted to. Bullet number 27 is related to that. There are a bunch of hidden worksheets here. I have not locked those down. If you want to unhide one of the hidden worksheets, which we'll do in just a minute, you're certainly welcome to do that, but again, it voids the warranty. That last bullet, number 28, says that during the design, the Excel file would occasionally lock up when using copy-paste commands. Now, initially, I've locked down copy-paste. You can't use copy-paste in this thing. I've given you some custom copy-paste tools, but you can't use the built-in ones. What I did find was using the built-in copy-paste tools, occasionally the file would lock up, and then there are some instructions in the help file on how to recover from that. In all honesty, in the last 8 months or so, I have never had it lock up. So I'm hoping that whatever was causing that is history now and will never cause you any problem. All right. So those were the disclaimers and cautionary notes. Let's talk briefly about this thing called the printer's worksheet. You have a copy of that as a handout. I'm going to go over to it right now. And I mentioned that during the hydro workflow, when you're running these VBAs within MicroStation, that final one called Drainage Summary Sheet, which in the background is called pads, that when you run pads in MicroStation, it runs out, grabs a template file from the hydro workspace, makes a copy of that, puts the copy in your project folder, and you have to follow the file and folder structure that we've specified. It puts it in your project folder and gives it a custom name, and part of that custom name is going to be the TIP, as well as a date is embedded within the name as well. So, and you never see the template file. That would be something for the people that maintain the workspace, which in our case is Bill Elam and a guy named Mike Kelly. They maintain the hydro workspace for DOT. The template file that sits in that workspace, what we have done as a courtesy to the Roadway people is ask them, what are your most popular printers that you like to print to for 11 by 17 or 22 by 34? And we went ahead and added those printers to this sheet. So when they go to print to one of these printers here, what the program does in the background when it uses one of my custom print buttons, it first of all gives you a dialog box letting you select a printer that you have mapped to, that you have the drivers loaded for. You get a little dialog box. It's a Microsoft dialog. It's not one I created. And that Microsoft lists the printers that you have mapped to. You select the printer you want to map to. After you say OK, then the program runs out and starts looking at, is that printer listed on this sheet or not? If you haven't listed it here, then the macro is going to terminate and give you a warning that you haven't listed it here. You need to come and list it. The way that you list it is you would enter its computer name here. The printer, the hardware name gets entered here. It is case sensitive. Odd. I never expected that, but it is case sensitive. That's noted off to the side somewhere, I think, over there. And all these other columns, it doesn't matter whether you populate those or not. The only thing that's important is this first column, entering the printer name. I would stay away from PostScript queues. That although it displays, the stuff displays on your monitor just fine, if you use a PostScript queue, one of the things we found that is that the kerning of a lot of the entries, the headers, and the number entries resulted in stuff overflowing cells with PostScript queues. So the final prints they had stuff that didn't print out the way you wanted them to be. You're welcome to try a PostScript queue, but certainly look at the final paper product to make sure that all the numbers and the headers print properly. My guess is they will not. If you do add, you're an end user, let's say, and you have your own personal printer sitting there beside your computer, and you want to print to that printer, and so you come to this worksheet and you add it here. Well, when you add it here and then save this file, you're saving it to your project file, not to the template file in the hydro workspace. That's fine. It's not a problem. It's just that you'll have to do that to every drainage summary sheet file that you do. If you're finding that you're repeatedly using that same printer every time for these things, then wherever your hydro workspace is located, if you want to go and alter that template file and add your printer name, you could do that. It's just that if you update your workspace, you're going to lose it. So you'd have to go back in and populate. Not a big deal. Any questions about this before I move on? Oh, well, let's talk about the larger format plotters here, 22 by 34. The plotters that we use are OSE plotters. The code for writing the plot macros that run behind this Excel file, we were able to get it so that it would work for the OSE. It turns out for any other model of plotter, the code is different for every model, and it just wasn't practical to test for what model you have and then put code for a dozen different types of full-scale plotters in there. The code for 11 by 17 format printers is pretty generic throughout the industry, but when you get to the plotters, it became a mess. So we are only supporting the OSE. Well, let's start manipulating the spreadsheet, or looking at some of the stuff that's going to help you manipulate the spreadsheet. We come over to the 48 or less. Unfortunately, with this laptop and its screen display, we can't see the guts of what we really want to see that well. All the stuff up here at the top is static in terms of scrolling up and down, and it's these rows here. That's where all the action is taking place, and unfortunately, even at a 90% zoom in Excel, I'm only getting about a dozen rows to show, so I apologize for that. On a desktop with a monitor that's more squarish than what the laptop is, you would see more of your data rows. So let's start off by looking at what some of the colors mean on the spreadsheet. The dark green is background. Dark gray columns are locked down. You cannot change the text that is within the column. That's fixed. Light gray columns are open to you. If you want to change anything in one of those light gray cells, you're certainly welcome to do that. Some of the columns are not filled out at all. That would be where you could add information that's missing from our template spreadsheet. Yellow column headers. See if we can go find a yellow column header. A yellow column header will have somewhere within the header #, #. That means that when you enter data down here in the data cells, you're going to have to restrict it to a specific dimension, and then you're going to have to, in the header, modify the dimension. So maybe that's supposed to be 48 on this particular, on your project. You would have to change the #, to 48 inches. So it's just a way of flagging to you columns that have the # in them and require user input.
That's where the contractor grade, that's what that column is right there. That's where those go. Then you got welded steel beside that, just as an example. And slide back over there to the beginning real quick.
That one?
No, all the way back to the beginning. Somebody was asking earlier about the do not use. That's still got to be hand modified. So there's nothing in the VBAs with the geopath range or anything that knocks out those.
Some of the color scheme that I'm talking about right now is described up here, and it's hard to read. I used poor colors up there, I'm sorry. But I do want to point out that last item, don't waste your time on formatting. This sheet does not print. I just can't emphasize that enough. What does red mean? Red indicates a column that has no data in it. And there's also a number there indicating how many rows do have data. So a red column should have none, and indeed it is showing 0. If a column has data in it, it will not be red, be flagged as red, and it will tell you how many rows have data in it. So you don't know where the rows are, but somewhere down below there are 3 rows that have data. Red diagonal fade is an indication that there is stuff out in the dump column. You've already seen that a few times, and we'll look at that again in a few moments. Anything that is unshaded, that is a data cell, and you're allowed to enter anything you want there. There are no formulas in any of the white cells. So these are hard numbers. Look up there in the formula bar. They're hard numbers, which means you can change them, and you can add your own numbers as well. Bright green. Bright green indicates a column that you are permitted to hide if you want to. Obviously, you probably would only want to be hiding columns that have no data, as indicated by the red. If you try and hide a column that does have data in it, say this column right here, column 12, You'll get a warning message that there is data in the column that you're trying to hide, and then I think it only gives you one option, that's to bail out. So I don't think it'll actually let you hide a column that has data in it. Puke yellow. Oh, this is the puke yellow I'm talking about here. I wrote some code that as you click within the data table, wherever the focus is located, it highlights the active column and the active row. That helps in your navigation up and down. So as an example, let's say we want to find out where's the first row that has data for 18-inch pipes. By highlighting any cell in that column, I can now scroll down to hopefully rapidly find that, and there it is right there. Olive green. Now we're getting into the territory where you're thinking about moving information from the 48 sheet over to the 54. In this column, you would enter the character X. That doesn't move the data over, but it flags it for movement over to the 54 sheet. And later on, there's a special tool that when you click on that tool, anything that has an X in it, boom, all at one time, it goes over to the 54 sheet. On the 48 sheet, it leaves that row blank. It doesn't close the data back up again. Where does it go on the 54 sheet? It finds where the last row of data is on the 54 sheet and then puts all the new stuff down below that. So if you then decided, no, I've moved something to the 54 sheet, I want it to go back to the 48, it's the same tool. On the 54 sheet, you put an X in the green column, and then you click the tool that moves it. It'll leave a blank row on the 54 sheet. Where does it put it on the 48 sheet? Not where it came from. It puts it at the bottom. It becomes the last row of data on the 48 sheet. And I couldn't put it back on the original row because that may not be present. You may have moved something to the 54 sheet. Then when you want to move it back to the 48, maybe there's been half an hour of work you've done in which you deleted that blank row. There's no way for it to go back to its original location. So it puts it at the bottom of the data. Light gray to the far right. There's some light gray here, and then light gray to the far right. Those are user columns. You can use them for anything that you want. The first column here, you can use that column if you want, but it's the column I also have used to dump information on. All right, so those are colors, the color scheme. Let's take a look at some of the column headers here. Take that first column, data row number. You know that in an Excel spreadsheet, the top left cell is A1, right? Well, in this data table, that first row is actually, according to Bill Gates, looks like 176. But in terms of the data table, it's row number 126. So I'm giving you the row of the data table over here on the right-hand side. Is there data present in the row or not? If there's a check mark here, that means there's something off to the right. Last row with data. It's currently showing 159 as the last row with data. If I scroll down there, hopefully 159 is the last row with data. And there it is right there. That doesn't mean that they're, how's the right way to say this? That the program is looking for literally the last row that has data. If I scroll down through the rest of this form, there should not be any data below that. What about if there are blank rows within the data? It ignores those. It jumps to literally the last row that has data. So if I went up here and inserted a row right there, that would change to 160. Dump column, we've already talked about this. That faded red indicates there's something out there in the dump column. The olive green column we've talked about. You put an X there if you want something to go to the other sheet. This gray column is a user column as well as the next one. The first gray column, you can put anything there you want. It also is intended to be used if you want to do sorting. This is the only column on which you can sort in the spreadsheet. I give you the ability to do two types of sorts. One of the types of sorts is to sort the data back to how it originally came into the file, how you originally open it. The other one is to sort the data based on information you place here. So if I placed 1, 2, 3 in here and then changed a number somewhere down below, clicked on my sort button that I've given you, it'll sort them 1 through whatever and all. How would that be handy? I've given you the ability to do an auto number. Let's auto number that. User sort column, blah, blah, blah. It auto-numbers them. And let's say that I really wanted 120 to occur between 1 and 2 up at the top. Between 1 and 2. So what could I do to 120? Come down here, wherever it was. I could make that 1.5. And now when I resort, and we'll show you the sort tool a little bit later on, when I resort, that should be my second row down. It fits between 1 and 2. 1.5 does. If I wanted this guy 123 to fall as next, I could make him 1.6, and then it would sort accordingly. Let's take a look at some of the column headers. Well, we've already started that. Some of these additional column headers here. Oh, system number. The VBAs that run within MicroStation do not pick up the system numbers. But if you wanted to manually enter those here because you like to see your system numbers, you could manually enter them there. Plus, if you wanted to use it for anything else, you could use it for anything else.
That's shut down print, right?
Pardon? Oh, yeah. Anything from this column to the left does not print. The first print column is here. Let's reply with this user column for end system number, sheet number. All right, the sheet number column. You see what looks like a computer printout with a torn off edge at the bottom. This is an indication to you that you are currently on sheet number 3A. That ties back into the home worksheet. If I had labeled this guy 3B as my beginning sheet number, that should update. Sure enough, there it is, 3B. And then it keeps track of that. How many rows to a sheet? 50 rows. Your page breaks are shown to you. There's a page break right there, so that's the first 50 rows. Next sheet should be 3C. These little icons also play a part in printing. Let's say that I only wanted to print sheet 3D. If I hover over it, I get a little hand. If I clicked on that, that would allow me to print just that one sheet if I wanted to. Let's talk briefly about the rows that are between the headers and the data table. So we start off with this first row right there. Number of entries, I've already talked about that. This particular column right here, there are 70 rows out of the 159 that contain data. If it's red, there is no data in any of the rows below. There are no data. And it shows a count of 0 rows. Below that row is a yellow bar that indicates the maximum print width. This position stays static as you hide columns. So if I hided those 6 columns right there, the columns would move to the left, but that red bar would remain static. And the game plan, when you finally get ready to generate your final product, is to get that position right there to be inside of that red line. And then the last row here is the row that has the bright green in it. You get a column number. In contrast to Excel uses alpha characters for columns, but I'm giving you a column number. And the bright green means it's a column that possibly can be hidden. If it's a background color, you cannot hide that column even if it's empty of data. Some additional rows to take a brief look at the very bottom. I have a red bar here that remains static. It indicates the last plot row. If you insert rows, let's say I inserted an additional 10 rows, I could have 2,010 rows. Those 10 rows would display below that red bar and they would never print. You also have a project total row here. It is locked down. Thank you. What about sheet totals? In the interface sheet, you do not get to see the sheet totals, but when you make your final product, sheet totals will plot. The final product will have sheet totals. You do get to see the project totals here at the bottom of the interface sheet. Occasionally a project total will overflow the cell, and you'll see that classic number sign, pound sign, pound sign, pound sign. We've built in the ability not to shrink it to fit, but instead we've given you the ability to rotate that number vertical, and when you rotate it vertical with my custom tool, the row height will expand to a sufficient amount to be able to actually display that number. We'll demo that tool in a few minutes. Going back to the sheet totals, which you do not see on the interface sheet, the sheet totals are formatted fit to print, print to fit, or whatever it is. So you may end up with some really dinky numbers that require a magnifying glass to see if you do an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. We've talked some about the dump column already. Out here to the far right. This is where the roadway user, anytime something occurs in the dump column, he's got to manually enter stuff in the appropriate cells and then come back and delete that item that's in the dump column to clear the red flag. Also, the dump column is a handy place to put notes to yourself about stuff you want to come back to. Let's say that this particular guy right here, I wanted to leave him for a little bit later on and come back and think about him later. I could put a note out here. I'm just going to put XXXX, but review later, or talk to so-and-so about this. And when I enter that, it gives me the red cell out here on the left as a flag that I need to come back and address that a little bit later on. All right, the next thing I'm going to show you are some, but not all, of the custom tools. Before I go to the custom tools and demo those, there's been no questions so far. Oh, thank you. The opposite of that is you're so confused and afraid you're not about to ask a question. All right, let's look at some of the custom tools. When we started developing this spreadsheet, we were using Office 2003, I think, which was Excel 2003. And Excel 2003, two of the things, one of them was good when we moved to Excel 2010. We skipped over 2007, DOT did, and went straight to 2010. And so that's when we saw the change to the ribbon. You remember Office 2003? You had toolboxes. When you went to 2007 or 2010, that's when they transitioned to the ribbon. It took me a long time to get used to the ribbon. I actually enjoy it now. I prefer the ribbon over the toolboxes. But something that they improved about Excel was they increased the number of columns that you could have. When we were using 2003 to set up the original 2,000 columns, really we had more than 2,000 because we were using some other columns to do some data processing with. And we hit the limit. We hit the column limit of Excel for 2003. And that drove some of the display that we had here, like the CS versus the CAA pipe. One of the ways that we could save columns with Excel 2003 was to say on a project you can only use CS or only use CAA pipe, but not both. That let us do the columns dedicated to those pipes, let us use those columns to do double duty just by renaming the column header at the top. Well, when we moved to 2010, the number of columns, the decimal point moved over. I mean, from our point of view, it became unlimited. And today, if we were doing this, probably we would not have the drop down for CS versus CAA. We'd have dedicated columns for each of those and be done with it. But we didn't know that at the time. So that was nice that the column numbers increased. That did give us some flexibility to add some more columns that Roadway came up. I want this column. I want this column. I want this column. So we were able to add some additional columns. A downside. In Excel 2003, a developer could build a custom toolbox that had tool icons on it and then leave that toolbox statically displayed no matter which worksheet you went to as you navigated in the Excel file. Bill Gates took that capability away in 2007. Now, developers are only allowed to use the ribbon for custom tools. You can't have a static toolbox that sits there always where you want it to sit. So I look at this as a downside because that means to use my custom tools, you have to have your add-in tab displayed on the ribbon. It's the add-in tab where this stuff is displayed. And by default, when you launch Excel the very first time, the add-in tab is not present on your ribbon. It's something you have to add to your ribbon. Now, once you've added it, Excel remembers that forevermore. But you must have the Add-in tab displayed. The Excel programming team, they make this desk PDF thing come up. I can't control that. Everything below that, those are my custom tools. Let's hover over them very quickly to see what their names are. Hide columns, unhide columns, insert a row, remove a row, move data back and forth between the 48 and the 54 sheet. This is for cutting and pasting. If you want to print the entire project, you would use this print icon here. Again, I've disabled the built-in print tools, so this is the one you would have to use. This is going to allow you to sort on this column. You get a choice of two different types of sort. Either sort on the values that are in this column or sort it back to its original order. And then I showed you at the very bottom of the interface sheet the project totals row. I mentioned to you that you could turn a value vertical if you wanted to. This would let you turn the value vertical. This would turn it back to horizontal. And then in Excel 2003, which is when we started developing this guy, if a number overflowed the limits of a cell, what did you see? Pound sign, pound sign, pound sign, pound sign, right? And if you clicked on that cell and it had a formula rather than a hard number, up in the formula bar, what would you see? The number, or would you see the formula? You saw the formula, didn't you? There was no way to know what that number was unless you, on the side, did a copy-paste special value. Then you could click on it and you know what the number actually was in that cell. So I built a custom tool here, which is that very last one, that if you clicked on that cell that was showing the pound sign repeatedly, a little dialog would come up and actually show you what the hard number was in that cell. I thought that was pretty neat. Excel 2010, all you have to do is hover over the cell. I think maybe even you have to select that, but it displays the number to you. So it's a tool that's no longer needed. Doggone it. Well, we're not going to look at every tool, and they are listed in your handout there. All the tools are listed and what they do. Let's just look at the hide columns tool. And we're going to go ahead and hide a sufficient number of columns here to let's hide a sufficient number of columns to get this thing within print range. And it'll take me a few minutes to do that. Bear with me. So go back to my add-ins. I choose the tool. Dialog says, select a contiguous range of bright green cells containing the column numbers you want to hide. Well, I'm not using, I don't want to hide so many here. Let's say that those guys right there. I don't want to hide all of those because if I do, it might squeeze my overall header down so small that I don't get to see all of that header. So I'm not going to hide every one of those. Instead, let's just hide those right there. Say OK. Choose the tool again, my add-in, and let's hide those guys there. Let's try and hide a column that has data in it. See what happens. 7 cells in the columns you've selected contain data. Select OK to hide the columns. Oh, so I did give you the ability to hide a column with data if you wanted to, but at least you get a warning. I'm going to cancel that one. See how close I'm getting. So I still have a fair ways to go there. I'm getting an invalid selection. I suspect what happened is that I scrolled from left to right. I slipped down and grabbed a cell below the green cells, and it's told me I can't do that, so I say okay, and we'll just try it again. Yeah, I grabbed the red cells instead of the green ones. All right, there's the red print edge mark, and we're trying to get to right there, so we are getting closer. Bill's up here laughing at me. There we go. I'm within print range. If I were to actually hide another one and some of this stuff were to pull within the print range, it would not print, so not to worry about. Okay, that was the hide column. If I wanted to unhide something, I'm not going to demo the tool, but you can see from the column numbers here, there's 17 and 30, so there's some columns hidden in between that. I would choose the unhide tool and unhide, select green cells, and they would unhide. Insert rows and delete rows. Let's try inserting a row. Let's say if for some reason, and just say, let's say that we wanted that row right there to appear on the next sheet. Select a vertical range of contiguous cells, blah, 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 blah. So let's select that one. That's the row we want to go down. And you can do more rows. You could insert 3 or 4 rows if you wanted to. I'm only going to insert 1. It moves that information down. It added an additional row. It's blank on that sheet. Notice we went to 160 for our last data row. And if I scrolled all the way to the bottom, you'd see now that I have 2001 rows of data rows. There's a delete row tool. I'm not going to demo that. The next one is transfer data between sheets. So we'll do a demo of that. And I don't know. I'm going to choose anything. It's for demo purposes. It's not important what it is. There's going to be an X there, an X there, and an X there. So those 3 rows, which are 17, 18, and 19, I'm going to move that information over to the 54 sheet. This one you do not get a second chance on. I click on the button and I think it just happens. There's no cautionary note or anything. Yep. So it leaves the source rows blank and it moves it over to the 54 sheet. Let's do one more so that you can see that the next information moved over here is going to go to the bottom. What we'll do here, let's insert a row. All right, so I've inserted one blank row right there, and if I come back to the 48 sheet and put another row here to go over, select my tool. Oops, I didn't finish the focus. Let's try it again there. So it left a blank row on the source sheet. Where did it go on the destination sheet? It did not go into the first blank row. It went to the bottom, got added to the bottom. Let's say, no, I really didn't want that there. I want it to go back to the other sheet. I flag it. It's not going to put it back where it came from. It'll put it on the 48 sheet, but it's going to put it at the bottom. And I don't remember what it is, but it has now, at 161, that's an indication that it did go to the bottom sheet. Print all sheets with data. I've already mentioned it. There's the tool right there. If I select that, it gives me a choice of 11 by 17, 22 by 34, or PDF. I'm not going to continue. I'm not connected to a printer, so nothing would work at this particular case. I do mention that if you selected the PDF, you're given an option of generating a single PDF file with all sheets versus one PDF file per sheet. And I've mentioned it also for printing that if you wanted to print just one sheet, let's say I wanted to print sheet 3C, click that button. It looks like the same dialog, but in this case it's only going to do the active sheet. And we'll demo the rotate vertical. Let's say that number right there, I wanted to rotate it vertical. Oh, it wants me to pick it after I pick the tool. So yep, pick that cell there. It rotates it vertical and expands the row height. If you had, this particular tool works only one cell at a time. So if I chose it again, rotate vertical, and let's choose that one right there, up it goes. Now let's say that, nope, I've decided I wanted to rotate them back to horizontal. The rotate back to horizontal works on everything in one fell swoop. So we'll go back and choose the rotate horizontal. And we're back at square one. Copy paste. I've mentioned already that I have killed those commands. You can't go to and do the copy paste commands. I could see sometimes when you might want to do that, but if you, so what I've done is giving you the ability to run a macro, but you have to know how to get to the Visual Basic page, where it's a dialog box where you can run macros. I'll show you that in just a minute. But if you decide to run that macro to re-enable the copy paste commands, you're on your own. In addition to that, I would recommend that never use copy paste. Use copy paste special values. That way you're not bringing formatting from one cell over to another cell and inadvertently reformatting a cell that you didn't want to do. So the recommendation would be to only use copy paste special, never copy paste. If you re-enable the copy paste tools, then, and I have given you a tool that lets you copy and paste rows of data. One of my custom tools will do that. But if you wanted to do more than that, and you enable the Bill Gates copy paste tools, use them with caution. And sometimes when you navigate from worksheet to worksheet, not all of the worksheets, but some worksheets are set up in my file that if you navigate it from this one to that particular one, it will disable the copy paste commands again on you in the background, and you'd have to re-enable them. If you exit the file and come back in, it's not going to save your setting for that. It's going to go back to the copy paste commands are disabled. Continuing on with advice, that if you do enable copy paste and you're only doing that for a short period of time, I think what I do then is run the next macro, which then re-disables copy paste so that you don't actually accidentally damage something. When might be a time when it would be really handy to do copying and pasting? That would be the time when the hydro user gave the roadway user a drainage summary sheet file early on in the game. The roadway guy invested a lot of effort in it, and he now gets 3 weeks later a new drainage summary sheet file, and he wants to copy and paste between the two files. That might be a time that would be really handy to enable copy paste in both files. I would not launch both files in a single session of Excel. I would launch 2 sessions of Excel, one file in one file in the other, and then copy paste back and forth between them. So how would you enable copy paste? It's not necessary, but I'm going to go back to the home worksheet. We need to go to the developer tab. This is another tab that is by default hidden. When you install Excel on a computer, the developer tab is hidden, but it's just another one that you can display along with all the other tabs on the ribbon. In the developer tab, I'm going to go to my macros list, and this is described in your handout. Go to the macro list and run the macro called enable copy paste, and you get 2 warning dialogues. Warning, enabling blah, 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 and it tells you that you should only use copy paste special. I'm going to say OK, and then it tells me that they have now been enabled, and we're off and running. But that would void the warranty. Let's say that I finished with my copy commands that I wanted to use, and I want to re-protect it with respect to those types of tools. I could come back to the developer, go back to macros, and disable copy, etc. Would let me add that element of protection back in again. Another way to do it would be to save your file, exit, then come back in again, and copy paste will be disabled at that point. If you're wondering about this state tier, non-state tier, alternate pipe, side drain pipe and all, I put a little matrix table here at the bottom of that spreadsheet printout to tell you how stuff is treated. That when you toggle between the two different settings on the home worksheet here, side drain pipe, well, that is actually now chosen by the hydro user. So when the hydro user is in MicroStation and he runs all of those VBAs, one of the things he's asked is what type of project it is. And once he specifies that, that specification transfers to the Excel spreadsheet, shows up to you here in this green cell, which is locked down, so you can't change it in Excel. But in the background, when the programs that ran inside of MicroStation, when they created this spreadsheet, they also altered all the headings in the drainage summary sheet related to that selection. That was another way that we saved columns. And so that table tells you how column headers are treated with respect to the type project that you're using. Riprap. Take a side trip on riprap. When we first started developing this thing, the programmer that wrote all of the programs that run within MicroStation for us, his programs were capturing riprap information. And it was dumping it onto the interface sheet, the 48 interface sheet, and we didn't want it there because riprap stuff's not supposed to go on the drainage summary sheet. So I started looking at code that as stuff was being moved from MicroStation Geopack into the spreadsheet, when you created the spreadsheet and all this was happening in the background, I started looking at code that would ignore the riprap, would actually delete that out of the background information. But then it became apparent, wait a second, the riprap information is still potentially valuable to you. You might like to have it. Why should I delete it? So rather than deleting it, I moved it to its own worksheet. It's basically a data dump. That's all it is. And you could copy this information. In this particular thing, I don't remember if the copy works or not. You might have to enable copying, but you could get this information into another Excel spreadsheet. I wouldn't use it here. This is not in any kind of print format that you'd want to use, but the data itself might be handy to you. So on the side, as a freebie, we captured this information and put it on a spreadsheet for you. I think we have enough time to look at a few of the spreadsheets that are hidden. Unhide. Let's take a look at the sheet that actually prints for the 48 or less data. So that's been reduced down to, if you remember, we hid enough columns to bring it within print range. So as you're hiding columns on the interface sheet, in the background, the sheet that actually prints, it's hiding those same columns. There are formulas on the print sheet that are looking at your interface sheet. If you change a column header on the interface sheet, this formula picks up your change. What if you changed it to Times New Roman on the interface sheet? Is it going to pick it up on the print sheet? No, it's not going to pick up formatting changes. Once again, there's no reason to waste time trying to reformat the interface sheet because it'll have no effect on what happens on the print sheet in the background. There is only one print sheet. What's the capacity of the program for 48 or less data? 40 sheets. It has that capacity. So what's it doing? If there's only one print sheet here, then obviously what's happening is that when you click on My Custom Print button, it looks at, let's say there are 13 sheets of data for the 48 or less. It looks at that first sheet, grabs all that information, brings it over to the print sheet, prints that sheet, then goes back, grabs the second sheet of data, comes over and replaces it on this sheet, prints that, and so on 13 times. That's what's happening. That kept the file, that kept the Excel file size smaller by doing that. Same thing with the 54 sheet. When you're in MicroStation and you run all these hydro VBAs, and you finally get to the one that's going to generate the Excel spreadsheet in the background. All of that ad hoc information that you bent over backwards to get all those elements ad hoc with all that stuff and all, that's the stuff that's being grabbed and dumped into the Excel file. Where is it dumped into the Excel file? It's not dumped on the interface sheet. It's dumped on a flat file. This is just an XY worksheet. It just gets dumped all here in the order that it's being processed by the VBAs and MicroStation. And then once it gets dumped here, code that is inside this Excel file is then looking at each row of data one at a time and deciding, do I know where that's supposed to go on the drainage summary sheet or not? If the code knows where that information is supposed to go, it then carries it over to the interface sheet and puts it there as a hard number. That's how we keep formulas off of the interface sheet, at least within the data table place. So all you have are hard numbers. That gives you, the user, the ability to edit the hard numbers. You're not hurting a formula by doing that. If the program comes across riprap, which you see is the puke yellow there, I think that's riprap. The dark green means that we were able to process something. Puke yellow, green means that it's riprap and it got carried to the riprap worksheet. And white is an indication that something didn't process.
Right. It's opening pipes we don't handle.
And that got dumped into the dump column. That's where that went. This is just general interest stuff. You should never have any reason to open this. If you do end up with a problem, though, Bill said one of the things he's going to look at is your ad hocs to see that everything got ad hoc correctly. If it makes it to me, this is the first thing I do, is I open up your raw data sheet to start seeing if everything is shaded the right color and got processed right. Let's see if there's... How is the processing done one row at a time? This is the spreadsheet. Each row of data that comes in on that raw data sheet, one row at a time, it's carried to this sheet, and then this is the sheet that has all the formulas in it up here. And some of the formulas get just horrendous.
He did that, I did that.
I'm just trying to find, I mean, there's a formula. So this is the critical sheet here. It processes the raw data one row at a time to get it onto the drainage summary sheet. And I think, thank goodness, I have reached the end of my speaking notes. So this is the time. Questions for either Bill or me? Yeah.
One problem that we've had in our office is running 32 versus 64-bit computers. Ours are 64 for some reason. We can only run at times on a 32, which we have one set aside. Has that been addressed, or is that just like maybe our office issue?
Are you running 64-bit operating system or 64-bit office products?
Operating system.
We're set up with 64-bit operating system, but Office 32-bit. All of our programs run 32-bit. Even though the computer is set up as 64-bit, the productivity programs are the 32-bit versions. We have heard of some consultants that are running Office 64-bit. I mean, obviously, to run programs that are 64-bit, you have to have a 64-bit operating system. We have a 64-bit operating system, but we're running 32-bit programs. We don't support 64-bit Office products. 64-bit operating system, yes, but 64-bit Excel, no. And we did run into some problems with that. You want to make any additional comments on that?
I think that did we not test it with the 64-bit Office and the test didn't work?
We did? So we did get it to work on 64-bit Excel.
Yep. Have you updated workspaces in the last week? Okay. There was a fairly significant upgrade to the code in the last week or two that hopefully fixed everything
addressed
was
part of
broken.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not getting that DPA errors across the
Yeah,
board.
specifically on the payout, utility,
That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
If you're still getting it, if you will take a picture of it, of the error message that comes up and send it to us, and probably helps to go ahead and just send the DRN file and the GDF file. We will try to look at it, and if it goes through me, then I'll push it to Brian, and then he'll send it to the programmer and possibly set up a live meeting with you to try to walk through the resolve it.
Isn't that, for you, from your point of view, troubleshooting standard operating procedures, I want the GDF file, I want the DRN file,
Yeah.
and if it managed to create an Excel file, I want the Excel file.
But you just did that on like Thursday, Friday, so.
Well, but that, actually I had a push about 2 weeks ago, then we changed the names to be the PU and the PU Legacy, and that for some reason broke it again.
Yeah, but we just talked to you.
Yeah, on Thursday you
Thursday,
showed me
Friday.
that, so we flipped it and made it work again, so it was only, so now it should be good again. You're gonna be one of the test dummies.